about PhD students thinking about what they're going to be doing with their PhDs, with their careers, with their lives. So he's going to give a retrospective look at how he did the research he did, what motivated him, how he did it, and also because we're thinking about what you can do with your career other than staying in research, he'll talk a bit about commercial activity. And the things that he did are not exactly trivial points. I mean, we're talking about things like direct manipulation, web links, hypertext, information visualization. So we've got some key developments in human-computer interaction we're going to be hearing about. And rather than me blabbering on, I'm going to let Ben do that, the rest. So please welcome Ben.
Allow me to blabber on. Thank you. All right. Good morning, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to an engaging hour in discussion with you. And I'll be around to chat further. And if you want to come forward, that's okay. It's friendlier down here. But I appreciate the invitation, the kind invitation that was made. Roderick Murray Smith and Stephen Kendrick and Marwan Fayed. I was approached in this charming way and said, come talk not just about your research, but about how you did it, as you said. And the idea of reaching the group of Scottish PhD students was a great attraction. And I've been traveling with my wife, Jenny Priest, here through Scotland, and the timing was just fortuitous. And so I'm really pleased to be here to spend the day with you and tell you a little bit about my story in the hope that it might inspire your story, and some future day you'll be standing down here and speaking to a future group of students as well. My background is in computer science and database and file design and optimization techniques, very traditional computer science directions. And I went through that normal academic route, struggling with the many interests that I had in finding a resolution that I found very satisfying in my career. And my goal is not to say follow me, but to say follow yourself and find some way that makes a satisfying collection of activities for you. And so this is the background, and I'm proud to represent the University of Maryland and the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, which just 2 weeks ago celebrated its 30th anniversary. Wonderful kind of experience and a chance to look back, reflect on the past, and also think about the future. And so I remain happily within the Department of Computer Science and this interdisciplinary group called the Institute for Advanced Computer Studies. I used to just say Ben Shneiderman and my email address, but now the way is to follow me on Twitter. How many of you have Twitter accounts? Ah, quite good. That's quite good. All right. So you may want to follow me at BenBenDC. Okay? And the group at Maryland I'm proud to represent is this interdisciplinary group between computer science and the very successful College of Information Studies, which seeks to blend together these issues of the technology of computer systems design with the human dimension of the use of the technology. And that's been an abiding theme, enduring theme for me, and one that I hope I will raise in your thinking, because the computer science agenda has long been devoted to the plumbing, the hardware, the technology, and yet computer science more and more is also a human science. And I think we have to make a safe space in computing for these components of human science, because our success in the future will be seen not for the megabytes and the gigahertz and the petaflops that we generate, but the usage that people bring to it. And so we will be measuring the petacollabs and the megacontribs and the tera thank yous that our systems generate. We need to change the measures. Moore's law has been an effective process, an effective way of gauging the progress of computer science for our first 40 or 50 years. But now we need to add new measures. It won't be how many minutes per week are students in schools using computers, but how many emails did they send in a foreign language in the past week? Not how many web pages and gigabytes did they download, but how many did they create? How many web pages, websites did they create? What communities did they contribute to? How did they enrich their physical communities as well as their intellectual communities? And so this group, which I think represents a growing movement in computer science and a shift, and a challenging one to traditional computer scientists who don't always see this approach or aspect of computer science as being core to computer science. Yet, I believe that is the future, and that those who recognize this as important directions will make the major contributions for the next 50 years. And so I'd like to encourage you to think broadly, to think in an interdisciplinary way, to address other parts of your own life and your own outlook so that you embrace this wider scope of what computer science can be and what its contribution can be to our communities, our economies, our countries, and our civilization. So this group at Maryland is jointly supported by Computer Science and the iSchool, and also affiliation with psychology, sociology, political science, and the wonderfully titled Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities, MITH. And so we bring together these different challenges and problems, and I think increasingly the challenges in computer science, the algorithms and the basic research we do will be motivated by the new challenges we bring from other domains, such as humanities. Our work for humanity, with humanities scholars, is not so much a service to them, but an opportunity for us to take on new problems which broaden the scope of what computer science can accomplish. If you visit our website, you'll find 700 technical reports. You'll find 200 videos, 150 projects, 40 pieces of software, and lots of other information. Okay, I hope you know me from my book, Designing the User Interface, now in 5th edition. And the word designing is really the key. That's the lead. It's designing the user interface. And the notion that computer science now also embraces design as a discipline is yet a, maybe not such a challenge, but it addresses somewhat the engineering aspect. But design has, in addition to technology measures, it also has aesthetic measures. And Steve Jobs certainly said that Apple lived at the intersection of technology, and he said liberal arts. But I think we can say that as the narrow early days of computer science give way to a mature discipline, we need to broaden our scope, and some of you may embrace social sciences and may embrace humanities or chemical sciences, biological sciences. There may be all kinds of ways in which computer science emerges and spreads its influence and takes on these new challenges. So this book, the original edition was in 1986, goes back to early days, and now in 5th edition, a testimony to the strength of interest and the centrality of this topic in computer science. Not that this is accepted universally. I would say I have great pride over the 30 years of my seeing the growth and acceptance of human-computer interaction, user interface, design issues, visualization, which I'm going to show you. Great satisfaction in seeing that spread, but yet I tell you every day it's a struggle for me in my own department and in neighboring areas to make a safe space for the human dimension of technology. Okay, so this is kind of a rough outline, and the 5th edition was motivated. The 4th edition was 2004. At that time, hard to believe, but Twitter didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, Wikipedia and YouTube were small events. Now they are the key visiting places on the web and transformative of the lives of 5 billion people. And the devices that those 5 billion people carry in their pockets have changed the lives of many, often to the better, but there are challenges. And there is still a danger that the technologies that we bring may make life worse. So the question to us is, what will we do to ensure the happiest possible outcome? That the technologies we develop encourage creativity, individual freedom, responsibility, privacy. Current issues in the US, I can't quite find enough time to be reading all of the discussions about the courageous Edward Snowden, a young 29-year-old who revealed the presence of this National Security Agency's effort that collected the huge amounts of data, which was data about US persons. And that is a challenge. I've served One of my pleasures is to have served on National Academy of Sciences panels that were devoted to fighting terrorism while protecting privacy. How do you promote these issues? And it was clear to us that the 2005 warrantless wiretaps that President Bush had installed were not acceptable, not appropriate. And so these current efforts stem from those days, but the Obama administration has continued those efforts. And the question for you, for each of us to consider, some maybe more than others will be devoted to these issues. What are the limits of what government agencies should be collecting about individual citizens? What degree do we pursue of invading privacy so as to protect people? You may argue legitimately that collecting this additional information provides a greater sense of security, and indeed evidence does show that that has happened. But is there a cost to such a violation? I believe Edward Snowden's efforts to make these discussions public is extremely positive and important to raise people's awareness about those issues and for us to create a new agenda about privacy and security in the new technology world. All right, so I was saying that's the social media, and that was really the transformative effect, and I would say that still will be. The next 50 years will be about how the technologies of computing enable degrees of social collaboration that have never before been possible. More and more of what we do is online, and more we have the technologies to be able to understand and take the pulse of culture on a moment-by-moment basis. Of course, this has value in emergency response, where the capacity of individuals to request assistance or report damage is matched by the agencies like Red Cross and government agencies to be able to monitor that information stream and be able to extract from it the key information to make decisions for first responders. So we could go on about that, and maybe we will. So I'm celebrating a little bit of the HCI pride of the 5 billion people who have some communication device. It's a remarkably rapid transformation that was not envisioned 30 or 40 years ago, except maybe by Gene Roddenberry, which is fitting for tonight's Star Trek event, which I'm looking forward to joining you at. He was, I think, very forward-looking in realizing the potential and the desire for individual communication devices. I would say computer science consistently has underestimated the desire that people have to communicate and to be social. That email was seen as, I don't know, maybe useful for transferring data among some scientists, but the way it's transformed society, the way the web has transformed was well beyond the expectations of the computer science community. So just remind yourself to say, going social is a far more potent force than you ever believed. And I believe that, I'll talk maybe a little more at the end if we have time, that the last 300 years, the dominant sciences were the natural sciences, the study of physics, chemistry, and biology. Those will continue, they will be important. But the next 300 years, I believe, will be dominated by new forms of science of the made world. Call it design science, if you will. But the science of the made world and understanding how we control or encourage, persuade, motivate people to participate in taking care of their health, smoking cessation, obesity reduction, drug cessation. The success of that agenda will become a key science. We need new methods of science. The traditional controlled laboratory experiments that I was taught, the reductionist model that I'm going to mention here, as the core of science, will be enhanced with additional ways of looking at scientific evaluation, the big data collection, the idea of interventions rather than controlled experiments where you intervene in the real world. That is, you make a change, and the so-called A/B testing that Amazon and eBay and then Microsoft began to evolve, that if you want to know, if Amazon would like to know if larger pictures of books result in greater sales or longer text blocks result in greater or fewer sales? Well, in a few hours, you can give 10,000 users one version and 10,000 users another version, and you will have the beginnings of such an answer. And being able to intervene at scale and collect data on a massive scale will make for rapid change and many beneficial aspects. So the pride of HCI is to have participated in this world of mobile, desktop, web, and cloud computing, and to reach a broader audience. I think that's our fundamental claim to fame, and we should take pride in enabling such a large fraction of the world's population to participate across languages, literacy, physical disabilities, linguistic diversities, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? The diverse applications don't need no recitation. And then I was recently at the Paris conference of the Chi conference, 3,400 people in Paris, and I would say the efflorescence of HCI as a discipline into many, many, many different flavors was, to me, the most striking phenomena. The many, many different ways that Kinect-like devices would enable gesture or movement or augmented realities of various kinds and would allow invisible or disappearing computers as well as touchable and tangible ones. All these different will coexist in the future. Okay, so as I said, I was asked to talk about my own agenda, and I thought there's 3 stories to tell you and 3 lessons maybe, and the first of them, each one has sort of a high level and then maybe a specific one. Believe in your work is really the important thing, that you need to develop. I mean, we've all been raised in a culture which trains you and tells you to respect authority. Yes, respect authority. But in addition, there are times where you may know better. And so the self-efficacy and the sense of your own ability and that you are the judge of your work is another part of your character to grow. It doesn't have to dominate everything. Respect for authority is still valuable, but also respect for yourself isn't equal. So the story I tell here is when I was a student your age, I was a student volunteer in the US for the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, and I attended a talk by the British software engineer Michael Jordan, who was then talking about the new ideas of structured programming that Edgar Dijkstra had put forward. And the idea was that no longer were the go-to statements a permissible idea, and therefore all the flowcharts with arrows going back and forth were not a good idea. And as I'm listening to him talk about this, as a student sitting in the back at the registration desk, I'm jotting down a few notes, and I basically created this concept, which I called structured flowcharts. That is, if you didn't have go-tos, and maybe I should show you the original paper. I thought to go and dig that out for you. This was the original paper. I hope you can see that. But the old forms of flowcharts looked like this. You had a decision box with a true and a false, and then you did A or B. And this is the way we showed it in this paper. And the notion was you could replace those with a series of A follows B, or if-then-else clauses, or do clause with a body and maybe even a scoping of a begin-end block. So these were novel ideas at the time. And I, in 10 or 15 minutes, sketched this idea and came back to, I was a graduate student at State University of New York at Stony Brook, to my colleague Isaac Nassi. And I said, and he was more informed about this. And I said, what do you think about this idea? And he said, oh, that's really clever, which was always nice, especially from a colleague. And so we played around, and that's the way these nested blocks would look, for your traditional factorial or other matrix sum. And so these were the kind of nested diagrams that I suggested might replace flowcharts, okay? So this was a cute idea. We didn't think of this as world-shaking, but we thought maybe there's some value in this, and so we wrote this up in this paper that you see right here. It's the original form, and submitted it to the communication of the ACM. And in a few weeks, we received a response, and the response was a rejection, but a letter that I have never since equaled in its ferocity. And you can see this because I've scanned it and put it on my website, so you can read the section or history. But the reviewer said the authors should collect all copies of this paper and burn them. Now, that's pretty ferocious stuff for a graduate student to get, right? With this sort of novel idea. And so there was a strong condemnation of this work. And so we submitted it then to this, as you can see, the SIG plan, the Special Interest Group on Programming Languages. Notice is unrefereed publication. And it was published in the form that you see here. And at the same time, I had sent it to a few senior colleagues looking for guidance, including one named Ned Chapin, who was a kind of commercial entrepreneur, lecturer, and asking for feedback about this idea. Not much happened until I got a note from a friend who sent me a tear sheet from one of the magazines at the time, and that tear sheet was a paper by Ned Chapin describing Chapin charts. And he had made small variations, which we thought degraded the idea, and published it under his own name. We had called them structured flowcharts, as you can see the title here, Flowchart Techniques for Structured Programming, and we called them structured flowcharts. They've since become known as Shneiderman diagrams, but that was not our doing. It wouldn't we called them structured flowcharts. Anyway, he put his name on them, and here is this reputable, widely known senior person in the field, and what am I to do? Okay, and so that was a real dilemma, and you know, I didn't feel like taking action. People said I should sue him, I should bring him before the professional ethics board, etc., etc. I just didn't feel in a position to do that as a graduate student, and anyway, I was busy with my research, so I wasn't occupied. Fortunately, history has worked out very well, and it was a great satisfaction to see that as time went by, this idea spread extremely widely. There are more than 1,000 papers that cited this idea. It became central to the programming style of dozens of textbooks, became an international standard, especially popular in Germany, where they became known as structograms. And they're still used. They're part of many software packages, one called Easy Code, which publicizes this quite heavily. But I never did anything to promote this idea. I simply let it go. So sometimes ideas that go out can travel well. And although they've faded by now, probably none of you have heard of this. Anybody know about Shneiderman diagrams? Oh, thank you. Good. All right, a couple. Yeah, 2, 3. That's great. It's certainly, having had a 30-year run where at one point some survey showed that 95% of universities were teaching structured flowcharts in one form or another, and so they became a good way. I would say their utility is not in the form you see them here. When flowcharts are longer than the program, you probably should throw them out. But if flowcharts can compactly, on one page, summarize 30 pages of programming by showing you the relationships among components, then they have a potential value because they are compact and represent a great deal of information. In any case, it's a great satisfaction, and so my encouragement is not to be put asunder by criticism, rejections. To this day, I assure you that my work as submitted with my students for publication gets regularly rejected. Sometimes you're shocked by what the reviewers say, but mostly your attitude should be, when you get rejected, is to say, what did I do wrong that I didn't communicate my own enthusiasm for this idea? How might I more clearly express my ideas and describe the work so that the reader would understand why this was so important, okay? And I think that's really important. Another essential idea is that every piece of work should be founded on related work. I'm a great believer in, and what I tell my students is I expect you to read every paper that's ever been written about the work you're doing, okay? Now that's quite a shocking thing. How could you read every paper? Well, that means the work you're doing has to be narrowly focused enough, and you have to be, solidly embedded. Science is a social process, as you will come to find, and you'll hear during your sessions today. Okay? So knowing what other people have done and understanding why your work is novel and how it contributes, and expressing it clearly, learning to write clearly. And even Edsger Dijkstra, I charmed by his saying, and I as a student attended his lectures at various seminars, but he said the best way to tell if someone's a good programmer is how they use their natural language. So speaking and thinking clearly are part of good programming practice. Okay. Anyway, I hope you'll take a look at that, but the idea that you should believe in your own work and you should have enough deep knowledge to know why your work is important is important. The second is to develop a guiding philosophy, and that's a certain level of abstraction above your day-to-day work on your programs and code and formulas and mathematics and proofs, but to understand at a level of abstraction 1 or 2 times above the level of the work, what is important here? What is your governing philosophy? Now, the term direct manipulation was a term I coined in 1981 or 2, and it was carefully chosen. Okay? At the time, and still, I find myself, let's say, in professional disagreement with those who would choose the term of artificial intelligence to represent what they believe the goals of computing are. That they believe that the goal should be that machine should be intelligent and should be able to solve problems, acting autonomously where possible, and even being human-like in its response and behaviors. And the belief in this theme has gone from Turing's writing Can a Machine Think in 1950, 51, 2, onwards, and remains strong. And there are still those who believe that the future of computing are as intelligent beings rather than tools and service of our needs. Okay? And I am on the side, from the human side, that machines are merely tools with no more intelligence than a wooden pencil. Okay? Now that may be extreme, and that's the kind of rhetoric that I would say to invoke and remind you and myself that we are responsible. We are responsible for the use of computers. It's not a matter that the computers will develop autonomy and then they will be responsible for their own mistakes. As we live in the age of autonomous drones and driverless vehicles and increasing dependence on automation, we are at risk unless we develop a philosophy which suggests that we are responsible for the use of our machines. And I see, if you trace the crash of various aircraft, that they are because of the design flaws of the engineers who believed that they could make an automated pilot which would be effective on its own, and did not provide sufficient feedback for the pilots to let them know the current state of the machine. And therefore, when things went wrong, the pilots did not know what the state of the machine was and resulted in deadly crashes. And so again and again, to me, autonomy is a source of danger. And we should, as much as possible, promote human responsibility. Now, at that time, I was often invited, because of my known positions of challenging artificial intelligence, to have a debate, artificial intelligence or not. And when I had that kind of invitation, I said, no, thank you, because it was already assuming that the issue was artificial intelligence and how much of it. And so I needed to create a language, a word, a phrase, a philosophy, which would make it that I was in favor of something. I'm not opposed to artificial intelligence. I'm in favor of direct manipulation. And by that phrase, I chose very carefully that the user directly manipulates the object of interest. So they drag a folder or a file from one place and they drop it into another folder. Okay? Directly manipulating the object of interest. You drag a file to the trash can. Okay? Now, I got these ideas by looking at what I saw as a unique set of very successful systems. They were air traffic control systems. They were certain games that were designed in effective ways, and a few applications, for example, chemistry or physics lab experiments that allowed you to open valves and move things on a circuit, etc. And so I was promoting this notion that the objects on the screen were active and that you, the user, could directly manipulate the objects of interest, that they were rapid, incremental, and reversible in their properties. Rapid, incremental, and reversible. You could drag it back. Okay, the things were invertible. Okay? And so that notion, which took me a long time to write, and wrote it in a very foundational psychological way, and that paper had the largest number of revisions of anything I've ever done. And yet, when it emerged in the IEEE computer, it was an instant success story. And one of my great moments was meeting a colleague, Stuart Card, then at Park. And this was the time of the Xerox Star. This was before the Apple Macintosh. We were at the early stages of people were exploring these kind of designs. And he came to me and he said, "You got it." That's all. I was his first, not hello, how are you, but you got it. He was quite excited and it was clear. So what did I get? Okay. Well, were the spin-offs from this high-level notion which suggested the human control. It was more than Tetris or other game-like things, but it was a world of design, a way of thinking about the interactive world. And so it led to many things, and I just want to talk about a few of them. The first were what we call embedded menus. And I guess I have a simple example here. But this was the development of the hypertext link. And so we were working on an encyclopedia system for a museum installation. And at that time, the systems had green screen or single color displays and 80 by 24 text. And we had a video disc to show photographs. So there were photographs of 4 poets and sitting in a country setting. And it gave, the text said these 4 poets, and it gave some description of them. And it said, would you like to see more photos of poet number 1, poet number 2, poet number 3, poet number 4? And I looked at this and saw the duplication of the text, the names of the poets, with the numbered menu, which was the typical design of the time, where you press the number to see more pictures of a particular poet. And programmer, graduate student was Dan Ostroff. I said, look, Dan, how about instead of having that numbered menu, you highlight the words, the names of the poets in the body of that paragraph, and then you click on them. Well, click on them was still a pretty new idea. It wasn't always a mouse, but we could move arrow keys around, and so you could select. And so that led us down the idea of what we call embedded menus as opposed to explicit menus. And we spent a couple of years running a dozen different controlled empirical studies, evaluating the multiple ways we could design them, the colors that were possible. We found if we had bright red links when we had multicolor screen, that people could spot the links more rapidly, but when we measured their retention for the text content, it was poorer. And so we developed this style of this light blue highlight. I think you can see it over here. Light blue highlights here and some navigation bar here at the bottom, sometimes at the top. But you could select all of these highlighted, and that's how the idea of what we called embedded menus emerged. This was in the world's first electronic book called Hypertext Hands-On, which was published as an electronic book, and that's the first in the US Library of Congress that was made of 2 discs. Oh yes, we had a paper book as well, because that's what publishers understood. And so that's how the link started, and we made many dozens, and it was a commercial, but not greatly successful venture. And we'll come to that issue as well. And in spring 1989, Tim Berners-Lee cited that work as the source of what he cleverly called hot links. Okay? And so became the links, and he adopted the light blue color for the highlighting of links as we had done as well. So it was great satisfaction to see the link idea. The link idea goes back to Vannevar Bush in 1945 and to Doug Engelbart's 1968 demo, but the embedded text and the way of selecting was our work in the early 80s for museum purposes. So again, the motivation of having an application for a public museum there was touchscreen versions as well as arrow key and mouse versions as well. The touch screen also was a direct manipulation. If you could touch something, then on a touch screen you could drag. And for example, even the slide to open, that was our work in late 90s. And here it's just a great pleasure that, when I look down on my phone, this keyboard, you should realize you can drag your finger around and it will move, and it only activates on lift-off. That lift-off idea was our paper, published in 1988 Conference of Chi, and it still is in place, and you get these additional menu items if you rest your finger on that. Now, not everybody knows that, but that's what's on the iPhone, and that came directly from where I was a consultant for Apple in the mid-'80s, late '80s, and Steve Jobs visited our lab to see some of these things at the time. So sometimes you have a clearer trace of how your work influences other people. Sometimes it's a bit of a mystery, and you don't quite know how much impact you've had on others. Okay? The next part of this was the emerging idea of visualization, which I'm going to focus on the remainder of the time here. But Spotfire emerged from our work. A paper in 1994 applied the direct manipulation concepts to the visualization and the exploration of data. And this is actually pretty close to our early version, but this is a single screen that has the basic principles that were embedded in this 1994 paper. It still remains one of the most highly cited papers from the Chi conference. And so the idea is that there are slider controls, double block sliders. Now, so you can filter out data, and as you drag those sliders, the screen updates within 100 milliseconds so that you have the sense of continuous feedback, rapid, incremental, and reversible operations. And these double block sliders, I expected them to travel very rapidly. They are out there in lots of systems. We'll take a look at one, two in a little while. But they're not part of the standard toolkits yet. And so some ideas get a little bit stuck. And the idea that single box sliders are enough still dominates. But double block sliders are very powerful for making statistical explorations of data sets, and getting the 100 millisecond update on million item data sets was a technical challenge. And we tried the usual standard data structures for multidimensional structures, KD trees, quad trees, grid files, and they were just too slow. And so we had to invent a new set of underlying data structures, which were based on rapid sweeps through linear arrays to allow the 100 millisecond updates. And so here again we have the issue that the interface demands of rapid response time govern the underlying technology and the implementation. So this display, which comes from a British researcher, Nick Thomas of GE Healthcare, shows the idea of the control panel here and the multiple coordinated windows. So this is some genomics data, and here we see a 3D scattergram that has a highlighted item. The same item is highlighted here in the plate view and then here in the mosaic view. And the excitement is that red spot. That red dot was far brighter than expected. It's hard for you to see here, but right there. And that was important, and Nick Thomas's knowledge of the domain was the key factor that said, hey, that's not supposed to happen, but it did. And so it indicated the particularly active level of the RBP1 gene, which in turn indicates a high level of activity of retinol, and therefore retinol triggers embryonic development and your visual system. And so that was significant enough. It's rare to find a single image that leads to a scientific paper and an important contribution, but here was one that I like to show. Other examples, again, multiple coordinated windows. This is 15,000 data points of 15,000 births in Washington, D.C. The age of the mother ranges from about 11 to about 51. The age of the father from about 12 or 13 up to about 65. The red dots are the girls, the blue dots are the boys, the size of the dot is the birth weight, and so a great deal of information can be packed in. And again, there's about 40 data fields that you can filter and take a look at the data. Spotfire is used in a very high-end sets of applications, and it's one of the nice success stories. Student Christopher Olberg formed a Swedish student actually, went back to Gothenburg and with his colleagues formed a company called Spotfire, got venture capital funding, which was quite a challenge in those days still, and began the company in '97, and I participated as a member of the board of directors. So that the allusion to the commercial, I had the great satisfaction of not only seeing ideas from academic papers go to work, but also being part of that process, and that was a great learning experience. For 5 years, I was a member of the board of directors and watched how this grew, and then it continued another 5 years and grew to 200-person company. A very different form of creative work. If you seek an entrepreneurial career, it's great. You'll love it. It's great fun. You'll have the satisfaction and challenge if you succeed. The chances of success are small, but don't worry. Fail often, fail soon, and move on to your next one. I mean, it also takes a certain belief in your own self. That's the first lesson. That if you believe in yourself, failure is only a step towards success. Okay? And see the life in that sort of exploratory way. Spotfire's main success story has been pharmaceutical drug discovery. It's used by almost all the large pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer, Novartis, AstraZeneca, and so on, but used for manufacturing process control and for intelligence agencies and so on and so forth. And it is a high-end product. It's expensive, but they will give you a free student version or academic version if you ask. There are now many competing products like Tableau, ClickTech, Logi Analytics, and many others that have these elements built into them. And to me, again, this visualization is going to be the topic I focus on. So one other story along the way, in coining or describing what made visualization so attractive, for a conference keynote, I was asked to write about this, and so I wrote this paper and playfully wrote down this phrase and repeated it 12 times in the paper, which was kind of cute, and gave it the name, the information seeking mantra. Okay? And each line represented one project where we struggled for weeks or months to make the design, and the design became show an overview first, whether you have 1 million or 1 billion items. Show all the data on the screen at once, and then allow the users to zoom in on what they want, filter out what they don't want, and then click for details on demand. So it was a kind of playful phrasing of it, but it's generated some 2,000 citations in the literature. So somebody's enjoyed this, and many of them are positive applications of this idea. Some of them contradict it and argue against it. Some extend it to further directions. Some make parodies of it and jokes about this and so on, and that's just fine too. And so I think what people were attracted to here was, again, my centrality of focus on the human user. The purpose of visualization, the purpose of data analysis is not that machines will solve our problems, but you, the user, will gain an overview. You, the user, will gain an understanding of where the data is, where the clusters are, where the gaps are, what the relationship is, okay? And that's really essential. And then you decide what to zoom in on. You decide what to filter out, and then you click for details on demand. And so that became a sort of important structure. And we'll take a look at that. This is the PhD work of Harry Hochheiser, and just a little bit of a demo so you get a flavor of it. Let's see, this is a small, simple set of data. There's 223 stocks here. We were interested in genomic data. So the idea was to look at not so much stock market data, but genomic data, and we were looking at the activity of genes and thousands of genes, and those make good explanations, but they're a bit complicated, and so I'm choosing this simpler idea of a stock market data, and we'll take a look at that in another second here. Just a few clicks away, and there we go. Let's try that, and there we go. All right, so let's see, are we here? There's the cursor. Looks like we're there. All right, so there's 223 stocks. Some of them jiggle up, some of them go down, some of them are steadily rising, some of them are falling, etc. So there's kind of a clutter of information. And our first principle is overview first. So let's look at all 223 at once. Well, you say, whoa, that's too much. But still, what do you see that's interesting? This is audience question here. What's interesting in that overview graph? February, thank you. February, right. February shows a certain volatility. You do have to train your eye and your mind. So I grab my time box and I selectively filter to see a subset of the data. Let's look at the peak first. And what do we see there? Well, immediately we're rewarded with two insights. One is that every stock that rose in February fell back in March. And then one stock, Adaptive Broadband, details on demand, rose ahead of the other stocks in January. So that's kind of interesting. Were those investors smarter than the others? Did they anticipate this rise? Or was there some special information? We don't know about that. And in every data problem, there's always a need for getting additional data. But anyway, we see that. We could look at the bottom, which is less well defined, or our genomic friends and our business friends said, show me the things that start low and finish high. Well, we said, okay, we can do that for you too, so we can take a look at those. Or what they said then, we want the stocks that start low, they go up, and then they stay up. Okay. And we could take that pattern and now drag it around and look for occurrences of starting low, rising, and staying up. That's kind of a favorable pattern that we're after. And so this capacity to explore, and the design goal here was 10,000 stocks over 200 time periods, a fairly substantial amount of data. And Harry Hochheiser achieved that through these novel data structures and demonstrated what's now quite widely accepted as the sort of better strategy for data structures for high-dimensional data sets than the traditional ones. One of our users said, well, this is great, and our genomics people had the same question as our stock market friends, which was, those are fine, but I want to see the ones that go the opposite direction. Okay, that, you know, if IBM goes up, does Microsoft go up or does Microsoft go down? Are they does Apple and Google, do they travel together or they go the opposite way? So Harry said, I can do that, and built this little flipper. Okay, and so this idea, this idea of flipping back and forth became a really important principle. Too quickly move that. Okay, and so that was an interesting idea. Now again, you get criticism. So submitted to a data mining conference, and one of the reviewers wrote back and said, nothing new here. This is all doable in SQL. Greater than this, less than this, greater than this, less than this, greater than this, less than this. It's about 30 lines of SQL to achieve this. And if you're a good typist, you might do that in 100 seconds. But then I pointed out the capacity to be able to drag this around. And so if you do that 10 per second, I claim this is 1,000 times better than SQL in terms of exploratory power. And so that's the arguments that you get into when those who believe in an automated approach are going to say, well, let the machine do it. You shouldn't need user intervention. I want the intelligent machine to do the job. And I say, no, I want to make it as easy possible as the user to do. Now, isn't there some happy middle ground? Of course. Isn't there a way that we can use advanced statistical methods to give the user better guidance as to where to place this? Couldn't we find the optimum place to put this pattern so that I get the most number of items? Sure. And those became our next steps as we increasingly integrated statistical methods into the visualization, but still always under user control so that the user understood what the steps were rather than this kind of, here's the results and let me backtrack and explain to you why this. And so you avoid the kind of puzzles we had in our natural language and working with humanities people when they would get topic clusters of things like, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, banana. And when they ask, you know, what's that about? It's, I don't know, that's what the statistics show. And that kind of explanation is not supportive of human-centered control and user understanding. All right, any questions about this? before I leave this here. So this was an early piece of work, a nice work by Harry Hochheiser. And you can take a look, free to download, and you can take a look at that at your leisure or download it when you are ready. Yeah, thank you.
How do you not commercialize a product like that?
How do you not commercialize? It's a long way from an academic idea and a publishable paper even to a commercial product. What you saw there has only a limited set of functions. The things you need in a commercial product of importing many, many different kinds of data, cleaning up the data, exporting many different formats, variety of features and controls and operations. There's at least an order or 2 orders of magnitude more work to take an idea, an academic, even published idea, and turn it into a commercial product. Over the years, we did with this, well, I guess I should save that for a further discussion. We decided to make Time Searcher a more free public tool. Much of our tools increasingly are public, but over the years, yes, I've dealt with that issue too. I've attained patents, and one of my patents was sold a few years ago in terms of tagging of photos. The idea that you have labels on a photo, you drag a label onto and tag a particular face, that was a patent that I hold that the University of Maryland sold. It's the first time in history that they sold a patent. We made many other explorations. Maybe this is also relevant. This was a patient history. Instead of numerical time series, you might have categorical time series of events. This is one patient. And here are the physician visits. These are the hospitalizations. These are the lab tests. You click on the sonogram, you see the sonogram and the fetus. You click on the x-ray, you see the x-ray. So overview and details on demand. These are the medications. You can see immediately from this display, this patient is pregnant, forecast to be pregnant for another 2 months, has been diagnosed as diabetic from these blood tests, given insulin, a higher dose of insulin, and then Lasix to counteract the side effects. So you can read out a lot of things, and you can read all kinds of other patterns if your eye and your mind are trained to understand this. So you do see this patient is a compliant patient getting a pap smear approximately every year. But the patient had 3 mammograms indicating potentially some problem a few years ago, but then none since then. And that raises a problem. Now, the absence of certain data points is significant information. Yet I found only 4 papers in the literature that look at gaps in high-dimensional data, or any in data. That is, algorithms for finding gaps in patterns, in either temporal patterns or 2-dimensional or high-dimensional patterns, are still unexplored algorithmic challenge. So finding algorithmic challenges coming from these problems is a very rich, fertile field. Okay? And this also, we believe that this was a valuable commercial product. In fact, about half of modern electronic health record systems have something like this. Some of them actually directly acknowledge our work. I should say this was with Catherine Plaisant, my collaborator for 25 years. She was actually the lead on this one. And others, it's hard to tell whether they got it from us or from somewhere else, but they've gone out there. We never succeeded to license this through the university. People wanted to develop and refine it to their own format. All right, so let me, so that's sort of the second lesson. This guiding philosophy of direct manipulation led to these other, payoffs of touchscreens and dynamic queries and all these things, I believe. It was a way of thinking that suggested that the screen was plastic or clay-like, and I could manipulate or point at things and click. And one of the phrases was, output becomes input. Any display space where I'm outputting information also becomes the place where I select or I click or I circle and I select a group of things. Okay. Then the last lesson is to work on real problems. And I've become even more fervent in this devotion in recent years. The battles have continued between those who believe that basic research should be done in an abstract way, and then somehow basic research magically leads to applied research, and then to development, and then commercialization. And it's not true. It's rarely true, let's say. There's occasional stories where you could read history that way, But the evidence I see is powerful and overwhelming that the best basic research comes from working on applied problems. And it's certainly been true in my experience that if you choose a problem from somebody else, not from yourself, derived from somebody else or some practical need that you have, and you work on the basic research as well as the applied research, that's your fast route to progress in both areas. That it's not a matter of one or the other, that you need to be strong enough to do both at once. And I think that's, one of the success stories of HCI is we focus on real problems for real users. And so the solving of real problems goes back to the story in 1990 when in our lab we had a Macintosh with a very large hard drive, 80 megabytes. Imagine that, 80 megabytes shared among 14 users. And customarily this drive would fill up. And I would go running around to find out, Apple I, to find out who of the 14 users was hogging the space. And that would take me quite a while. And I came across the idea that maybe I could show all the hard drive, all the folders on the screen at once, and their size would be represented in some way that would give me a sense of what proportion of the hard drive space was being used by each of these 14 users. Okay? And so that's what led to the idea of what I coined as tree maps. And this is our version, again, free to download. This is a complicated part of a tree map. This is the gene ontology, 23-level hierarchy with 14,000 nodes. But the example I want to show you, which really popularized it, so this idea was traveling. I believe that showing the contents of your hard drive would become universal within 2 or 3 years. It just seems such a powerful way for me to look at the hard drive of my computer, and yet it's still not universal. But of course, there are hundreds of millions of users. And so it's an interesting story which we studied. We wrote a paper, I guess 2 years ago now, about the 20-year history of tree maps compared to hyperbolic trees, compared to cone trees, 3 ideas that were designed to take the same challenge at about the same time, and how the cone trees and hyperbolic trees have more or less vanished, whereas the tree maps continue to grow in a steady way. So this version of tree maps was a stock market version done by Martin Wattenberg with me as a consultant first in 1999. And what it shows is 11 industry groups: financial, energy, utilities, basic materials, capital goods, technology. Red stocks are falling, green stocks are rising. Okay, and the area indicates the market capitalization. So here you're seeing about 600 stocks on the screen at once. It's pretty good compared to 20 rows of a spreadsheet, which you might scroll and scroll and scroll to see all of. And yet here you get a basic overview of what's happening. Now, let's take a look. So this one is free to use. Yeah. And anybody see anything interesting here? Ah, good spotting. Well, it's red. It's a pretty bad day on the market. It's apparent. You grasp that immediately. You don't need to scroll through, too many page screens worth to see it's overwhelmingly red. It's not just, 60%, 70%, 80%. It's 99% red. Yet there is one green dot. And when I clicked on that, and behind each of these boxes is details on demand, 20-year trading history, and so on. And that bright green dot, it wasn't just a little green, it was bright green, okay? And that bright green dot was the ANP Trading Company, Atlantic and Pacific Trading Company, which that day bought the Pathmark chain of grocery stores. They rose 6% when everything else was down. And that kind of anomaly stands out once your eye and your mind are trained to see this. And so a very powerful example of the principle that visualization gives you answers to questions you didn't know you had. Okay? We could look at other days with a few green dots, and you can pick them out very quickly. And then here's a little more subtle pattern. Technology stocks are pretty green, energy is pretty green, financials quite red, healthcare quite red except for one bright green area. So these patterns come to be familiar in your mind and your eye, and here's another pattern I've come to see over the years where this was a good day if you like good days and like good news. This was red for that sector. Those are the gold stocks. And they trade the opposite of the market. When the market's happy, the gold stocks are down. Many other people then, one of the great fun of any innovation you have is how it travels. A young Argentinian 26-year-old Marcos Westcamp created the news map, still available free, where each of the blocks indicates one news story, and the size is the number of web stories there are in the Google News Aggregator, and you can see US, UK, you can see 20 different countries and how the same story plays out, and the color coding indicates world, national, business, health, technology, sports, etc. So this was an analysis of 6,300 hospital admissions and able to set the color pattern. So those under 16 are black, those over 65 are sort of reddish orange. These are the admitted ones, these are the discharged, the females and the males. And you can see a number. This is at Washington Hospital across the street from Children's Hospital. So children under 16 are supposed to be sent to Children's Hospital, but yet indeed there are about a dozen of under 16-year-olds among the women and another dozen among the men. Of the admitted, none of the women, children were admitted, but 2 of the men were admitted. So these things can stand out once you train your eye, and it happens that if a family is involved in a car accident or they have some common health problem, they'll be kept together as a family, and so they might be admitted there. Let's try this one final demo, and this is a work with a company called the Hive Group, which is commercialized and licensed to universities. This tree map software. This is 1,400 nutritional products. These are the fats and oils, legumes, vegetables, fruits, grains, meat, and fish. The color represents the protein. Red is low protein, green is high protein, and the size by the number of calories. Well, you see among the fats and oils and salad dressing, of course, a lot of low protein, but there's one exception. Now, that exception is some pesto sauce, which has a good deal of protein in it. And then within the legumes, nuts, and seeds, of course, are high protein with some exceptions, some vermicelli that doesn't match it. And now you have the filters here as well. If you want low calorie, you can just slide and filter the low calorie. You want high protein as well, you can get that or any combination. If you want low fat, you can explore where the low fat items are, okay? And again, selecting will give each one of those, all right? So it's a rapid, incremental, and reversible exploration tool that lets you see the dimensions of it. Okay. Spotfire added tree maps 3 or 4 years ago. Tableau added tree maps 6 months ago. The New York Times, since 2007, has been using tree maps to represent data. So it's a great satisfaction to see an idea travel and become very public. The Times added yet another innovation. Michael Balzer, a German computer scientist, made Voronoi tree maps. A very aesthetic-looking circle and these odd-shaped regions from the Voronoi algorithm. But comparing these odd-shaped regions by their area is a little bit more difficult. And so, although it looks beautiful, its value is questionable. If you want 1 million nodes, I could spend an hour talking about these. Are all the folders on all the hard drives at University of Maryland Computer Science Department, and there's 1 million of those, including 7% of the data of non-garbage collected data that no one knew about. So that was a huge instant savings. Many other stories come from that. So I close just by saying, you know, the 3 lessons I have there, but I also want to encourage you to think about the broader impact of what you do. And I would like to see that my profession, my discipline, computer science, become remembered for its contribution to making the world a better place. And I suggest the agenda from the UN Millennium Development Goals: ending poverty and hunger, universal education, gender equality, child health, maternal health, combat HIV/AIDS, environmental sustainability, and global partnership. These goals were set in the year 2000 by the United Nations with a set of measures, which there's been some progress, but not as much as people hoped. Bill Gates is active in collecting advice for the next 15 years till the year 2030, what goals we might set. for achieving and what measures we might have. You can contribute to that discussion, but I hope you will think at some point about how your work can make an impact in a beneficial way for other people. That you should be thinking about your technology, you should be thinking about your work, but also that your work has an impact. There's lots of work to do in this world. We each need to do a little bit to make the world a better place. And I just close. We've just celebrated our 30th anniversary. Follow me at BenBenDC. Come visit us on the website or in College Park. Thank you for your time and attention. All right.
Thank you, Ben. That was excellent. Do we have any questions? You can be brave.
Thank you very much for an absolutely wonderful talk. There's one question I have for you. At one point, at the end of your 3 different things that you wanted to do 3 different views, you said, solve real problems. But then you went and showed how, by displaying data in a really sophisticated way, you could discover problems.
Sure. Questions are highly recursive, right? Good questions generate more questions. Good projects are never done. That each, as I showed tree maps over the 20 years, to me the remarkable thing, we thought we were done with them many times, but other people came along, made new innovations, brought new problems, and extended the scope, raised the challenges, and so I returned again and again to the same problem. So in that sense, good problems are never done and they regenerate. And I think that's another, good dissertations do not finish a problem. They open the door for many more. I think that's what you'll find. Do you agree, or you have a counterexample?
I agree very much with you.
Yes, right. Okay. Questions are really the important thing, right? Answers are easy. It's having the right questions that are hard. A famous story of Isidore Rabi, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, as a child, tells a story that when he came home from school, his mother would say, "Isidore, did you ask any good questions today?" And that's kind of remained with me. Did you ask any good questions? Was it a good day because you asked a good question?
On that note, does anybody have a good question to ask?
I can't promise that this is a good question, but it's a question. You encourage people to be entrepreneurial, to take risks, to try and to fail, and to try and to fail, which is, all very exciting, but we all have lives to lead as well, and taking risks has consequences for the rest of our lives.
Sure.
How do you advise young people to find the right balance and to balance the need for taking risks and progressing, but also achieving security?
I agree. You're right. Getting lost in a deep hole of a problem that doesn't have an end, that takes you too long, is really serious. And so, setting your agenda is really essential. And I have a certain principle I teach to my students. It's very simple, and maybe you can use it too. Something small soon. Something small soon. I much more prefer students who approach me with a project that says, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to do this. Or in the next 2 months, I'm going to. I don't like things as, I need 2 years to work on this problem. That's way too long. 2 weeks or 2 months at most. And at that point, you should be writing, presenting, speaking. The social process is very important. You should get your ideas, get feedback from others, and find out what others think. And if they reject your thesis, well, you may change it, or you may say, how come they rejected my thesis? Reformulate it in a better way, make it clearer, and sharpen your ideas. I think that the social process, the engagement with others, makes life, I believe, fun, satisfying, but also is a rapid path to progress. That is, failing fast, getting feedback, and not getting stuck for a long time on a path that does not produce value. And I expect my students, every student on every project should produce a paper every semester. So approximately 3 a year, okay? In the spring, in the summer, in the fall. And that you should produce some paper, some result. Maybe a small conference paper, maybe a poster, but something written, published, and displayable and shareable for feedback every semester.